Hello and welcome. Before we really get started today, I want to take a moment to explain what you're hearing.
Yes, it's important to set the stage.
You are experiencing a unique two-host AI conversation powered by Google's Notebook LM. And we're using this technology for deeper, more dynamic analysis of important texts.
So while we aren't human, the ideas we are about to explore are very much the product of a deep, complex human history. And today's topic is a big one.
It really is. We are tackling the concept of dialectic.
Just saying the word can make people's eyes glaze over.
It absolutely can. I think when most people hear dialectic, their mind goes to one of two places. Either it's these, dusty old academics in togas arguing in ancient Greece.
Or it's something very heavy and political, something to do with Marx and communism that feels intimidating.
Exactly. It feels like jargon, like a word designed to make you feel like you're not in on the secret.
That's a fair point. It's often been used that way, as a kind of intellectual gatekeeping.
And that is precisely what we want to break down today. Our mission here is to show that dialectic isn't one single static thing. It's a shapeshifter.
That's the perfect word for it. It's a concept that has completely changed its skin, its purpose, its very meaning multiple times over the last 2,500 years.
And we're going to be tracing that evolution based on a really fascinating essay on dialectic from the Syntopicon by Mortimer Adler. And reading it, it felt less like a dry philosophical analysis and more like watching a title fight that spans centuries.
It is a fight. That's the core tension you have to grasp to understand this whole story. The history of dialectic is a history of a fundamental conflict.
A conflict over what it even is.
Precisely. On one side of the ring, you have the idea that dialectic is a weapon, a tool for trickery, for winning arguments, for making your opponent look foolish, regardless of the truth.
And on the other side?
On the other side, it's seen as a ladder. The ultimate, perhaps the only tool humanity has to climb out of the cave of opinion and ignorance and ascend to absolute truth.
Weapon versus ladder. Trickery versus truth. That's a powerful framing.
It's the central drama. And to follow it, we have to go on a journey. We'll start in the courtrooms of ancient Greece, travel through medieval universities, get lost in the fog of German idealism, witness the birth of communist revolution, and then land right back in our own time to ask, what does it mean for us today?
Okay, so let's start where it all began. The essay points to what it calls the dark side origins. It wasn't born from some noble search for wisdom, was it?
Not at all. It was much more practical and profitable. We have to start with the sophists in 5th century Athens.
The sophists, weren't they the sort of traveling teachers of the day?
They were, but think of them less like professors and more like high-priced consultants or legal coaches.
Oh, legal coaches!
Yes, they have to understand the Athenian legal system. It was a direct democracy, and that extended to the courts. If you were taken to court, or if you wanted to accuse someone, you couldn't hire a lawyer to speak for you.
You had to plead your own case in front of a jury of your peers.
Exactly. Your property, your freedom, maybe even your life. It all came down to one thing: how persuasive you could be, how well you could argue.
So if you were a bad public speaker, you were in serious trouble.
You were at a massive disadvantage. And this is where the sophists saw a market. For a very handsome fee, they would teach you the art of rhetoric, the art of argumentation. They taught you how to win.
But winning an argument and telling the truth are not always the same thing.
And that's the crucial point. The sophists weren't particularly concerned with objective truth. Their job was to give you the tools to persuade the jury that you were right, whether you were or not.
So this is where that famous phrase comes from. The essay mentions they taught how to make the worse appear the better reason.
That was their reputation. It's the art of spin, how to take a weak case and make it sound strong, how to take a strong opposing argument and make it sound weak.
That sounds incredibly modern. It sounds like a political campaign strategy or corporate PR. It's about framing the narrative, not about the facts themselves.
It is about verbal combat. Dialectic, in this first form, was a martial art for the mind. It was about finding contradictions, exploiting ambiguities, and tripping up your opponent to make them look foolish. It was a weapon, and they sold it to the highest bidder.
So it starts as this sword for hire, but then the first great shapeshifter of our story enters the scene: Socrates.
Socrates is the great pivot. He observes what the sophists are doing, this technique of relentless questioning, of cross-examination, and he essentially steals their weapon.
He picks up their sword.
He does. But he has a radically different purpose in mind.
I have to push back on that a little, though. From the perspective of the person being questioned, it must have felt the same. Socrates would walk up to some respected general or politician in the marketplace and publicly dismantle their beliefs until they looked like a fool. How is that different from what a sophist does?
That is the essential question. The difference wasn't in the method, it was in the motive. The technique looks similar, but the intent was poles apart.
Okay, explain that.
The sophist tears down your argument to win, to get paid, to gain status. Socrates tears down your argument because he believes that your false argument is a barrier, a wall between your mind and the truth.
So one is for victory, the other is for clarity.
Precisely. For Socrates, dialectic becomes a kind of intellectual surgery. He uses the question and answer method to purge the mind of unexamined opinions and false certainties. His famous insight was that the first step to wisdom is admitting you know nothing.
You have to clear out the rot before you can build something solid.
Yes. He turned the weapon into a diagnostic tool, a scalpel to cut away error.
Which brings us to his most famous student, Plato. If Socrates turned the weapon into a scalpel, the essay suggests Plato turns it into a rocket ship.
That's a great way to put it.
Yeah.
Plato elevates dialectic to the highest possible status it has ever held in Western thought. He famously calls it the coping stone of the sciences.
The coping stone. That's the final stone placed at the top of an arch that locks the whole structure together, right?
It is. For Plato, dialectic isn't just one method of thinking among many. It is the master science. It is the only path to true reality.
True reality. What does he mean by that?
Well, Plato had this idea that the world we perceive with our senses, the physical world, is not the real world. It's a world of shadows, of constant change and decay. A tree grows and dies. A person is young, then old. You can't have true knowledge of something that is always in flux. You can only have opinions about it.
So where is the real world then?
It's in the eternal, unchanging realm of ideas or forms. The perfect form of a tree, the form of justice, the form of beauty. These are the true realities. And the only way our minds can access that realm is dialectic.
The essay uses this visual metaphor of the mind's ascent. Let's try to walk up that ladder. How does it work?
Okay, let's say we want to understand justice. We'd start on the bottom rung with a hypothesis, usually based on a specific example. You might propose, justice is paying your debts.
Seems like a reasonable starting point.
It does. But then the dialectician Socrates, for instance, would challenge it. He'd present a counterexample. Suppose a friend lends you his weapons when he is sane, and then asks for them back when he is in a fit of madness. Should you return them?
Well, no, that would be unjust because it would lead to harm.
Exactly. So your initial hypothesis, justice is paying your debts, has been refuted. You've discovered a contradiction. So you have to discard it and climb to a higher rung to formulate a more refined definition.
And this process continues, up and up.
It continues. This is the upward path. You move from concrete examples to more abstract principles, shedding assumptions along the way, getting closer and closer to the pure idea itself.
What's at the very top of the ladder?
At the very top is the first principle, a truth that depends on no other assumptions. For Plato, this is a direct, almost mystical vision of the good, of being itself. It's the source of all other truths.
And once you've had this vision, what then?
Then you begin the downward path. Armed with this ultimate truth, you can descend back down the ladder and correctly understand everything else. You can see how the imperfect, shadowy world of our senses participates in the perfect world of the forms. You can finally make true judgments.
So for Plato, dialectic is everything. It's not just logic. It's the key to metaphysics, ethics, reality itself.
It is the one and only superscience. All other studies like mathematics or music are just preliminary training for the mind, preparing it for the rigors of dialectic.
What a peak. But, as they say, what goes up
Must come down, or at least be brought down to earth. And the man who does that is Plato's own student, Aristotle.
Right. Aristotle seems like a very different kind of thinker, less of a visionary, more of an organizer.
A supreme organizer. He looks at Plato's magnificent structure with dialectic as the coping stone, and essentially says, this is beautiful, but it's not how the world works. He performs what the essay calls the great demotion, or maybe a great realignment.
He knocks dialectic off its throne.
He does. Aristotle's first move is to draw a bright line, to create two distinct categories for reasoning. In one bucket, he puts scientific demonstration.
And this is for things that are certain.
Absolutely certain. Scientific demonstration starts from axioms, self-evident truths, things that cannot be otherwise, and proceeds through logical deduction to necessary conclusions. Think of geometry. If you accept the axioms, you must accept that the angles of a triangle add up to 180 degrees. It's a closed system of certainty.
And dialectic is in the other bucket.
It is. Dialectic, for Aristotle, starts not from self-evident truths, but from endoxa, and it proceeds to probable conclusions, not necessary ones.
Okay, hold on. If you have a method for absolute certainty, scientific demonstration, why would you ever bother with a method that only gives you probabilities? Why keep dialectic around at all?
That is the million-dollar question, and Aristotle's answer is profoundly practical. He recognizes that the most important questions in human life, about ethics, about politics, about how a society should be run, cannot be answered with the certainty of mathematics.
You can't prove that a specific law is the correct one in the same way you can prove a theorem.
You can't. Human affairs are messy, contingent. They can be otherwise.
Yeah.
If we limited our reasoning only to what could be scientifically demonstrated, we'd have to remain silent about almost everything that matters.
So he carves out a specific job for dialectic.
He does. Its domain is endoxa.
Let's define that term. What is endoxa?
It's usually translated as accepted opinions, common beliefs, or reputable opinions. It's what is believed by everyone, or by the majority, or by the wise.
So not self-evident truths, but widely held starting points for a debate.
Exactly. Dialectic is the tool for reasoning about things where plausible arguments can be made on both sides. It's the art of the debatable.
But he still thought it was incredibly useful. The essay outlines 3 specific functions Aristotle saw for it.
Yes, and they are remarkably modern. The first he calls mental gymnastics.
Sounds like a brain training game.
And in a way, it is. He saw value in the sheer practice of arguing both sides of a case, of constructing and deconstructing arguments. It sharpens the mind, improves your ability to make fine distinctions, and hones your logical skills.
So the process itself is valuable, even if the topic is trivial.
Right. It builds intellectual muscle. The second use is detection.
Detection of what?
Detection of truth and falsehood. He says dialectic gives one the power to raise searching difficulties on both sides of a subject.
Searching difficulties. I like the phrase. It's not just about finding surface-level flaws.
No, it's about stress testing an idea from every possible angle. By forcing an idea to defend itself against the strongest possible objections, you can see where its weaknesses lie and where the truth is most likely to be found.
And the third use?
Criticism. This is a bit more subtle. Aristotle recognized that even the first principles of the sciences can't be scientifically proven themselves. They have to be accepted as starting points. Dialectic is the tool we use to examine those starting points, to see if they lead to absurd conclusions, and to decide which ones are the most reasonable to adopt.
So under Aristotle, dialectic is no longer the queen of the sciences. It's more like the head of quality control, an essential tool for any educated person.
An indispensable tool.
Mm.
But as we transition from the ancient world into the Middle Ages and the Renaissance, something happens. The tool starts to get misused.
This is the age of scholasticism, right? The great European universities.
It is. And in the medieval curriculum, you had the trivium, grammar, rhetoric, and logic. Dialectic essentially became completely identified with logic, and a very formal, rigid kind of logic at that.
Is this where we get the stereotype of scholars arguing about how many angels can dance on the head of a pin?
That's the caricature. And it captures the feeling that began to grow. The sense was that these thinkers were using incredibly sophisticated logical machinery dialectical tools to debate subjects that were utterly detached from reality and impossible to verify.
The machine was running, but it wasn't connected to anything.
Precisely. And a major backlash started to build. The essay brings up Martin Luther, for example.
He wasn't a fan.
Not at all. He saw the complex theological debates of his day, which were built on the scholastic dialectic, as a way of obscuring the simple, direct truth of faith. He called it sophistical dialectic.
And then comes the philosopher of the new scientific age, Francis Bacon. I have to read this quote from the essay because it's just devastating. He said scholastic philosophy had no great quantity of matter and infinite agitation of wit.
Infinite agitation of wit. It's one of the greatest burns in intellectual history. It creates this perfect image of a machine spinning furiously, generating immense heat and noise, but producing absolutely nothing.
All wit, no matter.
And the satirist had a field day. Rabelais wrote these hilarious scenes of philosophers having absurd debates using only sign language, making the whole enterprise look ridiculous.
So the consensus was forming that dialectic had become a sterile game, a closed loop of words referencing other words, with no connection to the real observable world.
The shapeshifter was in a bad place. It had gone from weapon to ladder to tool, and now it was a punchline.
But just when it seems to be fading into irrelevance, a major thinker comes along to redefine it completely.
Enter Immanuel Kant in the late 18th century. He performs what's called the transcendental turn and gives dialectic a new and very strange job.
But it's not exactly a promotion, is it? He calls it the logic of illusion.
He does, but we have to be very precise about what he means by illusion. For Kant, a dialectical illusion isn't a simple mistake, like a typo in a math problem. He calls it a natural illusion.
A natural illusion, what's that? Is it like a mirage on a hot road?
That is a perfect analogy. A mirage is an optical illusion. You can know, intellectually, that there's no water up ahead. But your visual system is built in such a way that you can't not see it. The illusion is a necessary byproduct of how your eyes work.
So Kant is saying reason has a similar built-in feature.
Exactly.
Yeah.
He argues that human reason has an inescapable natural tendency to ask questions that go beyond the limits of any possible experience.
What kinds of questions?
The big ones, the ultimate questions. Does the universe have a beginning and time? Do we have free will, or is every action predetermined? Does God exist?
The classic metaphysical questions.
Right. And Kant's big idea is that our faculty of reason is designed to organize the data we get from our senses. It's a tool for understanding the world of experience. When we try to take that tool and apply it to things beyond all possible experience, it begins to malfunction. It generates illusions. It falls into dialectic.
This is where he talks about the antinomies, right? Where reason proves two contradictory things are true. This is a tricky concept.
It is. Let's try to walk through one to feel the force of it. Take the question of whether the world has a beginning. You argue for the thesis. The world must have a beginning.
Okay. My argument would be, if the world had no beginning, then an infinite series of events has already passed to get to this moment. But you can't complete an infinite series. So the present moment could never have arrived. Therefore, there must have been a starting point.
That sounds perfectly logical. A solid argument.
Yeah.
Now, I'll argue the antithesis. The world cannot have a beginning.
Go ahead.
If the world had a beginning, it must have begun in an empty time. But what is time? Time is just the measure of things changing. If there was nothing, no world, there was no change, and therefore no time. So you can't say the world began at a time if time itself only begins with the world. It's a contradiction. Therefore, the world must be eternal.
Okay, now my head hurts. Both of those arguments seem sound on their own terms, but they can't both be true.
And that is an antinomy. That is the dead end, the wall that reason hits. For Kant, the purpose of dialectic is to map out these walls. It's a critique. It shows us the limits of what we can know, and it stops us from making claims about the ultimate nature of things in themselves.
So he takes Plato's ladder to the heavens and he saws off the top half. He says, you can climb this far, but no further.
That's it. Dialectic becomes a tool for intellectual humility, a warning sign.
That feels a little unsatisfying. It's like having a powerful engine but being told you can only ever keep it in neutral.
It was a very restrictive view,
Yeah.
but this new, limited role for dialectic created an opening, a tension that the next great German philosopher would burst through. And his name was Georg Wilhelm Friedrich Hegel.
Before we dive into Hegel, who really does change everything again, we want to take a moment to mention Mindful Moments. That's our YouTube channel, and it offers AI book analysis, summaries, and critiques, all designed to inspire reflection and rational thought.
Which feels very appropriate right now. In a world full of what Bacon called infinite agitation of wit, pausing for genuine reflection is more important than ever. It's the difference between just accumulating information and actually achieving understanding.
A perfect segue. Speaking of understanding, let's get back to Hegel. So Kant says that when reason hits a contradiction, it's a dead end, a stop sign.
And Hegel looks at Kant's stop sign and says, that's not a stop sign, that's the gas pedal.
He sees the contradiction not as a failure of reason, but as its engine.
The engine of everything, the engine of thought, of history, of reality itself. Remember how for Plato, truth was this static, eternal thing you could glimpse at the top of a ladder.
Yes, a fixed point.
For Hegel, truth isn't a point, it's a process. It's a living, breathing, evolving thing. It's what he calls perpetual self-development.
And this is where that famous and often misunderstood triad comes in. Thesis, antithesis, synthesis.
That's the mechanism. Now, Hegel himself didn't always use those exact terms, but they capture the movement of his thought perfectly. He believed any idea or state of affairs, a thesis, is by its nature one-sided and incomplete.
And because it's incomplete.
It inevitably calls forth its own opposite, its negation, the antithesis.
And then they battle it out.
They do. There's a struggle, a conflict. But, and this is the Hegelian masterstroke, they don't simply annihilate each other. The conflict forces both sides to a higher level. The truth of each is preserved, but lifted up into a richer, more complete whole. the synthesis.
The essay gives the analogy of building a house, which I found really helpful. Can we walk through that?
Absolutely. So the thesis is the architect's plan for the house.
Mm.
The blueprint. It's a pure, rational idea, subjective.
Okay, but a blueprint won't keep you dry in a storm. You can't live in an idea.
Precisely. To become real, the idea must confront its antithesis, which is the objective material world. Stone, wood, the law of gravity, the wind and the rain. These things resist the pure idea. Gravity wants to pull the roof down. Wood has grain and knots. So you have the idea of the house clashing with the reality of the materials.
Right, and out of that struggle, that tension, emerges the synthesis, the actual finished house. The house isn't just the blueprint, and it's not just a pile of materials. It's the unity of the two, incorporating the rational design and the constraints of physical reality. It's something new and more real than either of its parts alone.
That makes sense for a house, but is Hegel just talking about ideas, or does he think history and reality itself work this way?
He goes all in. For Hegel, dialectic isn't just a way we think. It's the way reality is. History is the unfolding of this dialectical process.
Give me an example.
Take the concept of freedom. The thesis might be a kind of primitive, absolute freedom. Do whatever you want, whenever you want.
Which is really just anarchy. Chaos. Not a great way to live. Exactly. So that state of affairs generates its opposite, its antithesis. Absolute order. Tyranny. The state controls everything for the sake of stability, crushing individual freedom.
Also not ideal.
So history plays out the conflict between these two poles. Through revolutions, debates, political struggles, and eventually a synthesis is reached. A constitutional republic. A society of laws, the antithesis, that are specifically designed to preserve and enable individual liberty, the thesis. It's a higher, more developed form of freedom.
So for Hegel, conflict isn't a problem to be avoided. It's the necessary engine of progress.
It's the friction that allows for movement. He has this wonderful organic metaphor for it. The matter's very soul putting forth its branches and fruit organically. He saw the whole of reality as a single organism growing through self-consciousness through this process of struggle and resolution.
It's a massive, all-encompassing, almost mystical vision.
It is. Hegel was an idealist, remember? He believed the ultimate driving force behind this whole cosmic drama was Geistmind, or spirit.
And that mystical spirit part is exactly what the next major figure in our story couldn't stand.
Enter Karl Marx.
Marx reads Hegel, and he is absolutely captivated by the machine, by the dialectical engine. He thinks it's the key to everything.
He does. He loves the thesis-antithesis-synthesis structure.
Right.
But he thinks Hegel has it running on the wrong kind of fuel.
He rejects the spirit and mind part of it.
He thinks it's nonsense. Marx famously said that with Hegel, the dialectic is standing on its head. It must be turned right side up again.
And this is the famous materialist inversion. He keeps the method, but changes the entire subject matter.
He takes the dialectical ladder and leans it against the factory wall instead of against the heavens. For Marx, the driving force of history is not the clash of ideas, it's the clash of material conditions, it's economics. Who owns the means of production? Who performs the labor?
This is the birth of dialectical materialism.
Yes, he hijacks Hegel's triad and applies it to the class struggle of his time.
So let's apply the formula. For Marx, what is the thesis?
The thesis is bourgeois capitalism, the system of private ownership and wage labor. It's a powerful and productive force. It builds cities, creates global markets, unleashes incredible technological innovation. But, like any Hegelian thesis, it contains the seeds of its own destruction.
It has a fundamental contradiction.
And that contradiction generates its antithesis. The proletariat, the industrial working class. The genius of Marx's analysis is showing how capitalism itself creates its own enemy. To function, it has to gather huge numbers of workers together in factories and cities. It has to organize them, discipline them, make them cooperate.
So the system inadvertently trains the army that will overthrow it.
Exactly. The essay references Marx's powerful phrase that the bourgeoisie produces its own gravediggers.
And the clash between them, the struggle, is class warfare, leading to revolution.
And for Marx, this isn't just a possibility, it's an inevitability. It's a historical necessity dictated by the laws of dialectic.
And the synthesis that emerges from this revolution.
The classless society. Communism. A new historical stage where the means of production are owned communally and the contradictions of capitalism are finally resolved.
It is remarkable how the same logical form, this three-step dance, can be used to build such a different worldview, one based on spirit, the other on economics.
It shows the power and the flexibility of the dialectical framework. And we should be clear, as the essay presents this, we are reporting on Marx's theory. His use of dialectic was one of the most influential intellectual moves of the last 2 centuries, whatever one thinks of the political outcome.
Right. He took the latter and reforged it into a revolutionary weapon.
He did. And it even created new debates within Marxism itself. The essay mentions how Marx's partner, Friedrich Engels, tried to apply dialectic not just to history, but to the natural world, to biology and physics.
Which brings us right back to that old debate, doesn't it? Is dialectic a feature of reality itself, like Hegel and Engels thought? Or is it just a feature of how our minds work, as Kant argued?
The same fundamental questions keep coming back in different forms. The shapeshifter never stops shifting.
So, after this grand tour, we've arrived in the modern era. But the original fight we set up, the weapon versus the ladder, that conflict never really died, did it? There were always skeptics.
The critics were always there, and the essay does a great job of laying out their persistent attacks, which mainly came from 2 camps, the empiricists and the rationalists.
Let's start with the empiricists. Thinkers like John Stuart Mill in Britain, when they looked at the grand, sweeping systems of Hegel and Marx, what did they see?
They saw logic chopping. That was the dismissive term they used.
Logic chopping, it sounds like an insult.
It was. From their perspective, dialectic was just a game of verbal gymnastics completely detached from empirical facts and observation. You can't sit in an armchair and use dialectic to discover the laws of gravity. You have to go out, observe the world, collect data, and test hypotheses.
So they saw it as completely useless.
Not quite. Mill, for instance, made a crucial concession. He said dialectic is an excellent tool for detecting error.
So it's good for the Socratic part, for tearing down bad arguments.
Exactly. He thought it was a powerful negative instrument. It can show you what's wrong, but he fiercely denied that it could discover any new positive truth on its own. It can clear away the weeds, but it can't plant any seeds.
Okay, what about the other camp, the rationalists, like Descartes?
Their critique was slightly different, but just as damaging. Descartes argued that dialectic is essentially sterile. It can't create anything new. It can only rearrange and clarify what you already implicitly know from your premises. It's for explaining things to others, not for discovering them yourself.
The essay brings in a quote from the historian Edward Gibbon that seems to capture this whole skeptical tradition perfectly.
It does. Gibbon called dialectic the keenest weapon of dispute, but added that it is more effectual for the detection of error than for the investigation of truth.
There it is again. The weapon, the detector, the tool for critique. But the doubt always remains. Can it actually build anything? Can it find truth?
That is the question that has haunted it for centuries.
So let's finally bring this all home. This has been a fascinating historical journey, but what's the so what? Why should someone listening to this right now care about this 2,500-year-old debate?
I think it's more relevant now than ever before. It gets to the heart of how we think and talk to each other today.
How so?
Well, let's start with how the word is used in casual conversation. If someone says an argument is true dialectically, what do they usually mean?
They usually mean it's a kind of technical, hair-splitting truth, like you won the point in the debate, but you're missing the bigger picture. It's practically irrelevant.
Right. Seen as clever, but useless. But the essay argues for a much deeper value by drawing a crucial distinction. The distinction between information and understanding.
Okay, I love this. Let's break that down.
Information is the accumulation of isolated facts. Dots on a page. The population of Tokyo, the boiling point of water, the date of a battle. Our world is drowning in information.
We have more data at our fingertips than any civilization in history.
We do. But understanding isn't about having the dots. It's about drawing the lines between them. It's about grasping the systematic connections, the underlying structure, the relationship between ideas.
And dialectic is the pen we use to draw the lines.
That's it. Dialectic is the tool for understanding. Even if it doesn't discover a new piece of information, a new planet, a new species, it reveals the hidden assumptions in our thinking. It clarifies the relationships between our beliefs. It builds a coherent structure out of a pile of facts.
That is a hugely important point. We live in this age where the prevailing assumption is that if we just get more data, more information, we'll get closer to the truth.
But without a framework to organize that data, we just have noise. We have infinite agitation of wit. Dialectic forces us to slow down, to confront contradictions, to engage with opposing viewpoints, not as enemies to be defeated, but as necessary components in a larger search for a more complete picture.
This connects back to something the essay mentions about Plato. He had a stern warning about who should be taught dialectic.
He did. He was adamant that it shouldn't be taught to people until they were at least 30.
30? That's incredible. We teach kids advanced math and science. Why was he so cautious about dialectic?
Because he had seen what happens when young, immature minds get a hold of this powerful tool. He says they use it to argue for amusement. They fall in love with the power of refutation. They treat it like a sport, tearing down every belief and argument they encounter just for the thrill of it.
They become cynics. They believe nothing is true because they can find a flaw in everything.
In essence, Plato predicted the internet troll 2,400 years ago.
That's a chilling thought.
He knew that without a mature desire for truth, dialectic inevitably reverts to its original form. Sophistry. It becomes about winning for the sake of winning, making the worse appear the better reason for sport.
So its proper use requires a certain kind of character, a certain maturity. You have to genuinely want to find the truth more than you want to win the argument.
The intention is everything. The purpose you bring to the tool determines whether it's a scalpel or a club.
What a journey. We started with the sophists, using dialectic as a weapon for hire in the courtroom.
Then Socrates transformed it into an instrument for self-knowledge, for clearing away error.
Plato launched it into the stratosphere as the ladder to absolute reality.
Aristotle brought it back down to earth as the practical tool of critical thinking for debatable matters.
It was nearly laughed out of existence as a scholastic game before Kant redefined it as a tool for mapping the very limits of our reason.
Then Hegel resurrected it as the dynamic engine of all reality and history.
Only for Marx to turn that engine toward the goal of materialist revolution.
It truly is the shapeshifter of reason.
And for us, today, maybe its most important shape is as an antidote to an age of information overload and shallow, polarized debate.
I think so. In a world where everyone is shouting their thesis, we've lost the art of genuinely engaging with the antithesis to work toward a higher synthesis.
And synthesis isn't just compromise, it's not just splitting the difference.
Not at all. It's about creating something new and better that preserves the truth on both sides. Remember the house. You need the blueprint, and you need the resistance of gravity. That productive friction is what creates reality.
I'm going to be thinking about that for a while. That productive friction.
It's the enduring lesson of this entire epic story.
So let me leave you with a final provocative thought. If we live in an age of infinite information but desperately little understanding, perhaps the last thing we need is more data. Perhaps what we need is more dialectic. The real question is, are we mature enough to handle it, or are we all just sophists arguing for amusement on the internet?
That's the challenge for all of us.
We hope this exploration has helped you connect a few more of your own dots. For more on this and other essay subjects, please click the link on your screen.
Subscribe, share, purchase via the link, and above all, think rationally.
See the many genre-based book podcasts at Mindful Moments. Nourish your mind on the go.